I have never read a comic that made me feel like this. This is my review of Murder Falcon. Welcome back to Comics Are Dope. I'm BJ Kicks, and today I am reviewing Murder Falcon by Daniel Warren Johnson, who is the writer as well as the artist. It's got colors by Mike Spicer, letters by Russ Wooten, which are names you're probably all familiar with if you are familiar with Daniel Warren Johnson's work at all. This is a book that was recommended to me by a good friend, and this is the very rare comic that has made me feel like in real life. And so I'm going to talk about this book. I'm going to give you my review. We'll talk about the art. We'll talk about the story. I'll give you my overall impressions and why I think everyone should read it. But it is going to be impossible for me to talk about this book outside of the experience that made me read it. And to tell you that, I am going to have to spoil this book, but I promise I will save all the sentimental feelings and the spoilers for the end of this review, and I will warn you before I do it. Now, let's get into this review. Let's just start off with a quick overview of the story. Now, Murder Falcon is a book about a young man named Jake. We actually open it up seeing Jake in action in one of the most ridiculous ways possible. But after we get this sort of flash forward into the future, we go back to the past to learn, what the origin story of what we just saw was. And Jake is a guy who's pretty down on his luck. He is a guitarist, a metal guitarist who used to front a band, a very good band. And about a year ago, something happened that just kind of, set him on like a downward spiral. And since then, he's lost his wife, he's out of his band, and he's just generally depressed. He's not feeling the power of the music anymore. When all of a sudden something crazy happens, this man goes to get his guitar. He finds out that it's a magic guitar and it can summon this huge kaiju-like creature named Murder Falcon. Murder Falcon is exactly what he sounds like. It's a heavy metal falcon, an anthropomorphic falcon with a bionic arm, who is sent from the heavy, which we can kind of look at as like a heaven reference. He's sent from the heavy to fight against the forces of Magnum Chaos, who, by the way, is tearing a hole in the earth and opening a portal to this whole dark dimension and unleashing monsters all over the earth. And what we find out is that the only way to fight these monsters is with the power of metal, because Murder Falcon, or Murph, as we come to know him, is actually fueled by the music, right? So in order for Murph to fight off these monsters, Jake has to play his guitar, and he's got to do it really well. And so we get set on a journey for Jake and Murph to team up together to fight against the forces of Magnum Chaos and hopefully save the world. Now, in order to do that, he's going to have to get his old band back together. They're going to have to recruit all the great musicians of the world to do it. And along the way, we learn a lot about Jake, and specifically why he was so down on his luck and why it is so difficult for him to play through his emotions. And man, if you are familiar with the work of Daniel Warren Johnson, then you know he always finds a way to throw heart in his stories. Just between this and another story I've read from him, Do a Power Bomb, I've learned that about him. And so the emotional core of this story is something that I don't want to spoil at all. But what I'll tell you is that if you love dynamic art, if you love the colors, if you read Do a Power Bomb, this is honestly a no-brainer. But if you haven't read any Daniel Warren Johnson work before, then the best way I can describe it is, or the best thing I can say to convince you is that it's unlike anything you've ever read, but it's going to give you all the feels of I don't know, man, anything you ever loved. Like, it touches on your family, it touches on relationships with your kids, it touches on relationships with your friends, and just the delicacy of life and all of those things. And that is about all I can say without spoiling this book. Now, I do want to take a minute just to reference the art because the art is amazing. What's funny is Daniel Warren Johnson is not someone whose art I would have jumped at, outside of reading his stories first. But what's crazy is just how awesome and bombastic and kinetic and action-packed the art is, as well as how well his art serves his stories. I mean, a lot of Daniel Warren Johnson's books just sound like they start with super ridiculous concepts and how is this going to work? And at first glance, it sounds like it's going to be something super shallow. Murder Falcon, about Falcon, a huge kaiju powered by heavy metal. That sounds insane. But anyway, the art serves the story well. It's super expressive, really moody at times, but also super action-packed at others. I particularly love when we get to the heavy. I love how the colors change. So Mike Spicer, I love how the colors change during the flashback scenes. And I love overall how Daniel Warren Johnson somehow is able to convey the power of music and the dynamism of music through 2D art on a page. It's really crazy because you can't hear the music, but you can feel the way the music feels in this book. I don't know how to describe that, but anyway, the story's awesome. You get to know a bunch of Jake's friends and bandmates. You get to see the world that he lives in, and you get to see him facing his fears head on so that hopefully they can save the day. Now, I wanted to talk about the art. The art and story are all by Daniel Warren Johnson, so it just sounds like a big Daniel Warren Johnson fest, but the colors and lettering do add a lot to the story as well. So definitely check it out. Everybody gets A grade for their work on this series. And now I think all that's left to do is explain like my afterthoughts of this book. Now, this is the spoiler section, the sentimental spoiler section that I warned you about. So if you don't want to know anything about, if you don't want the end of this book spoiled for you, you can jump off here. But for everyone who's read the book already, I just wanted to give you my experience as a reader and why this hit me so hard. So as I said earlier, this was a book that was recommended to me by my homie Skip. He was a moderator in our Discord server. And he's always trying to get me to read indie comics. So after I read Do a Powerbomb, he's like, yo, you got to check out Murder Falcon. And I was like, yeah, cool, I'll get around to it. Never really got around to it. Just recently, we found out that Skip got really sick. Skip got sick. And during his sickness, basically, Skip had cancer. But before they discovered the cancer, they just found a tumor. And I was like, yo, okay, that's wild. That's a big deal. Do you need anything? And I asked him if he needed anything. He was like, yeah, just read Murder Falcon. And I was like, all right, bet, I'll read it. And, less than 2 months later, my man Skip was no longer with us. In fact, today, as this video goes live, I am preparing to watch his funeral via live stream. And that was wild. So when your friend who died of cancer recommends a book, you're like, all right, well, let me see what this book is about. And when I finally read what got Jake down on his luck, I was like, yo, I was paralyzed. I did not want to go any further in the book because what we find out is that Jake got a cancer diagnosis too. And he kind of let it take over his life. He kind of he used that as an excuse to push all his friends and his family away, to isolate himself. And, I guess he thought he would just waste away, until Murph comes into his life and recruits him in this war where he's got to use his skills, his creativity to save the world. And, it was so crazy because, you know, having friends online, it's like, it's so easy to kind of lose touch and stuff. And so I hadn't spoken to Skip in about 2 weeks before he passed. And in the time since he passed and before I read this book, I spent a lot of time wondering, like, man, what were his last couple of, you know, weeks like? Like, I hope, like, you know, he was good. Hope he wasn't afraid. Hope he was at peace, you know. And I read this book and there was no way for me to separate the character Jake from my friend Kurt. And I was so appreciative that I read this book because it gave me, even, you know, after his passing, an amazing way to remember my friend. Because the way this book ends is, if you're watching this far, you've either read to the end or you don't care that I spoil it. Jake does also end up passing from cancer, and he uses every last bit of energy that he has to make sure that the world is saved. And then the book ends with this really heartwarming moment where Jake realizes he's passing on, and he tells his friends, he says his goodbyes to his friends and leaves them all with different parting advice and how they can move on without him. And then he goes on to live in the heavy, where the land where there's going to be a lot of heavy metal. And that's the end of the book. But yeah, there was no way I could like separate the ending of this book from, you know, my friend in his last days. And I was so appreciative that this gave me a way to look at it. Cause you know, looking back on, you know, Skip's, time, in my life, I feel like he knew that he was sick and he knew that he didn't have a lot of time left. When I look back at all the things that he did for me and for other people, and just his general excitement, it was clear. And maybe this is me putting something on it in hindsight, but it feels like he was trying to take advantage of every minute that he had to sort of instill excitement in as many people as he could. And even, you know, staring death in the face to recommend a book like this, it says to me that's how he wanted to be remembered, as someone who went out giving it all that he had and ultimately leaving no regrets on the table. And man, we should all aspire to live that way. So Daniel Warren Johnson, if somehow you ended up watching this video, I just want to thank you for such an amazing book. I said in my intro, this was the first book that like really made me feel like, somebody asked me if there was ever a book that I felt super personally connected to. And I'm like, I read a bunch of superheroes. Nothing really feels personal to me. It's just all exciting and action packed. But this was a book that hit me right here. And, I didn't expect it. And I'm so grateful for it. So just in case you were wondering, this book is a 10 out of 10 for me. There's no way to objectively rate this book. So yeah, this book makes it to the Comics Are Dope Hall of Fame. And I'd recommend it to anyone who has lost a friend, especially to cancer, but it doesn't have to be to cancer. If you've dealt with heartbreak, if you've dealt with loss, if you've dealt with trying to find redemption in something, especially in art, this is definitely something to check out. So with all that said, I appreciate you guys watching my review, and thanks, Skip, for the recommendation. Peace.